Thank you and good evening. Today we're doing, as mentioned, County Government 101. When I first came to the Cape full-time, I was very used to a Board of Selectmen, a town manager, and that was it. And so to come on board and hear about this other section of governing, I find that this evening is going to also be very helpful to me. So I'm pleased to announce our guests this evening. We have Leo Kakunis, who is the chair of the commissioners, Jack Unitz, who is the administrator, John Oman, who is a member of the Assembly of Delegates. And what I've asked each of them to do, first off, is to just give us a brief background on themselves. So we'll start with Leo on that.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, thank you for having me this evening, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for putting this forum on. It's extremely important that we educate not only our newcomers here on Cape Cod, but certainly some of the people who have been here for a long time on exactly what Barnstable County government is all about. With that said, briefly, a lot of people think that I was born on the Cape, but I was not. I was born up in the North Shore. I have a bachelor's degree in engineering. I was a structural engineer and did a lot of work up in the city and the North Shore. And about 35 years ago, my wife and I had had enough of city living and wanted to move down to the Cape. So we arrived in Harwich. My roots are farming. I grew up on a farm up in the North Shore, and we returned to farming. Presently now we have 63 acres of land in Harwich. Majority of that is cranberry bogs, but we do run a small livestock operation with cows and pigs and sheep and goats. As far as my other background in municipal involvement, I started in town of Harwich, did building code review because of my background in building, and from that went to capital outlay. From there, spent many years on the finance committee. I think I termed out on the finance committee, spent 9 years. Went to the Cape Cod Commission as the Harwich's representative. Spent, I believe, 6 years there, and then was elected to the Assembly of Delegates. Spent, I believe, either 4 or 6 years on the Assembly of Delegates, and then now I am the representative of entire Barnstable County as a county commissioner. So thank you again.
Thank you, Leo. Jack.
Thank you, Joan. Leo's very humble. He's, without a doubt, he likes to call himself just a simple farmer, but he's the most well-informed elected official I've ever had the opportunity to work with and for. My career in politics took a different kind of upswing. I was raising a family in Brockton. I had 4 great kids who loved the town. I had a very good business, and suddenly the town hit a roadblock. Things weren't going well. My friends on the chamber and a few of the local elected officials decided to convene a little group to see if we could find somebody to run against the incumbent. And by the luck of bad news, I was the one who was ultimately chosen to run, and I had never been engaged in this game before, so I asked the team to run a poll, not with my name in it, because nobody was going to know me except the kids I grew up with and played ball with all my life. And the poll showed convincingly that the incumbent was had a very high unfavorability rating, so we gave it a shot, and we knocked it 7,000 doors that summer. Every day after work, I'd go out every night, all day Saturday, Sunday, and so on and so forth, to deliver a message that the city was savable, and I had a plan for it. I put it in writing, actually, and we did ultimately live up to it. So I served Brockton for 10 years, and after 10 years, I imposed term limits on myself and decided to move on. I went back to the private sector for another decade, and when this opportunity arose, I had to take a good hard look at it. I was a very lucky young man whose father saw the beauty of Cape Cod on the Bayside in Dennis when Ted Williams was still in left field. So I've been coming down here a long time. And like my dad, I love Dennis. So perhaps the one who loved it even more than me, though, was my wife. At the time, I was contemplating joining the judiciary, and I was at the last step of the process when Mary Pat called and said that I had been selected to take this position. So it was by chance and by great luck that I have the opportunity to come here and work, and quite frankly, to a very important, critical county. We'll talk more about that in a little while, so I won't get into that now. But it's been a great opportunity, and the guy to my left has been a huge inspiration for us to get things done.
Thank you. John Oman.
Thank you for inviting us here. It's very important that the community gets to know what the Montville County people do there, because we do a lot of critical things for us. I just want to embellish Jack. He's somewhat modest. He's also a well-respected lawyer statewide, and he has the ability to call on colleagues throughout the Commonwealth and get critical information at a critical time to help Barnstable County negotiate these very difficult times. He does it on a regular basis. He never takes credit for it, but I don't know where we'd be without him in this particular time. For myself, the Assembly of Delegates is the first political office I ever had, but I've been there 11 terms now, so this is my 22nd year, which makes me, I guess, the dean of the Assembly, of the longest-serving member ever of the Barnstable County Assembly of Delegates, and I really enjoy it that way. It's a good time fit for me, and it's a good way to give back to the community. On a personal level, I'm happily married to my wife, Kathleen, out in the audience since 1988, so 29 years, and we have 3 grown children. We have a focus on autism. I want everyone in the public to know that. Our own town of Dennis has given our group, it's called Forward Friends or Relatives with Autism and Related Disabilities, has given us 5 acres of land to build housing for autistic adults. The critical need is there, and we're working diligently on completing that. The town of Dennis has been very good partner with us so far, and that's our big focus besides government. On the business side, we own 2 seasonal clam shacks. We own Kate's Seafood in Brewster. My wife is Kate. And we own Liam's out at Nauset Beach. So we have 7-day businesses from May through October. And then when we sort of wind down from the business side of things, we get to give back to the community more and more. And that's when the Assembly of Delegates really kicks in for me.
Thank you. The plan this evening is to ask a few questions through me. And so if you have some questions, there are cards going around. I can't see too well who has them, but if you raise your hand, you can get a card to fill out in clear writing, please, questions that we will present to this panel in a very few minutes. So now let's talk about Barnstable County and the whole plan and governance. And Leo, as one of the commissioners and as the chair, why don't you talk about that?
Okay. Well, first of all, the most confusing thing is the name, Barnstable County. Many of you who've moved here to Massachusetts, which, by the way, is a commonwealth, not a state, but if you moved to Massachusetts from other states, you've probably had county governments, and you're under the impression that Barnstable County government is similar to that. The truth of the matter is it is not a county government. A number of years ago, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts did away with their county governments, and what they offered here on Cape Cod was the opportunity for us to establish a regional government known as Barnstable County. That's the legal name. It's a regional government known as Barnstable County. Now, as simple and as easy as I can make this, what is the difference? Well, we do not operate under the state charter or Massachusetts state law or any laws that govern county governments. We operate under our own charter. So you might even hear this evening, for the 3 of us, referring to the charter from time to time. It's very important because if it's in the charter, it is law and it is how we need to operate. If it's not in the charter, then we would refer back to state law, and if state law doesn't govern it, we would refer to federal law. But most times, anything that we encounter stops right at our charter. Time to time, we may have to refer to state law. You might hear us talk about open meeting laws and things like that. That's where state law comes into effect, because we don't address that in our charter. I'm only going to talk about the executive branch, because that's the part that I'm involved in, and that's why I'm here this evening. The executive branch, excuse me, everybody turn your cell phones off, by the way. Executive branch is outlined clearly in the charter. The executive branch is the county commissioners. The county commissioners, there are 3 of us. They are elected by culmination of the total number of votes Cape-wide. What does that mean? That means basically that if someone runs for this seat, they have to run in every single town from Bourne to Provincetown, and it's the culmination of the total votes that, I thought I shut it off, I'm very sorry. It's the culmination of the total votes that let you win the seat. So in other words, if in fact you win every town, but you don't have the total number because your opposition got 40,000 votes in the town of Barnstable, say entire town of Barnstable turns out and votes for them, and they get 40,000 votes, but you run and you win every other town, but you have 36,000 votes, well, they win. So that's the way it is set up. It is difficult, as you can imagine, for someone to run for this seat, again, because it does encompass the entire Cape. There are very few elected bodies that do that. Even our state senators do not have the entire Cape. The Cape is split off. I believe there's 3 towns that go with the Plymouth side senatorial seat. With that said, not to get into the weeds of it, but most of you probably come from small towns or even towns that have a government where you have selectmen, and then those selectmen are elected, and the selectmen do the business of the town for your residents of that town. Well, that's exactly what the county commissioners do. They are the selectmen, if you will, of the entire Cape, of the entire Barnstable County. Our duties are defined in the charter, and the duties basically are to be the executives of the business, if you will, of running the county. We do the hiring, we do the firing, we do the signing of the contracts. If there was land to be sold that the county owns, we would actually enter the negotiations, if you will. And John, I'm sure will touch on it later, would have to get approval from the legislative branch to sell the land, but it would be us, the county commissioners, that actually sign the deeds over. And vice versa. If we're purchasing land or a large piece of property, we act as the signing authority for Barnstable County. Again, very, very similar to your towns. And I try to break it down because, again, most towns here in the Cape have selectmen, except for town of Barnstable. But even I could make the correlation between us and the town councilors too, because they're the ones that also have that authority. In the charter, we can delegate the day-to-day operations, though. When I say we hire the people, yes, the county commissioners sign the contracts for the hired people. But I'm not there 5 days a week, and neither are my fellow commissioners, the other 2, 5 days a week. So we need someone to take what we put together for policies and procedures and actually institute them on a day-to-day fashion. And to do that, we hired a county administrator. And the, again, charter is very clear that we have the ability to delegate. Not only in the charter, you can actually see jobs that the county commissioners give to the county administrator, but there's also the bottom line that says, and any other delegated authority we want to give him. For example, signing of contracts. You can imagine that, well, maybe you can't imagine, so I'll tell you, there are hundreds of contracts that come across the desk in the county. Majority of them are for $30,000 or less. Well, the county commissioners a while back said, you know, this is crazy. We're signing stacks of contracts, and many of them are just repeat contracts. Contracts with W.B. Mason for the paper goods, contracts for the shredding company, things like that. So they, at that time, decided to give the county administrator the authority to sign any contracts of $30,000 or less of value. $30,000 or more, stay to us. Other than that, I think that gives them a background, anyhow, on what the county commissioners do. And I don't want to, if I go too much more, I'm going to start stepping on these guys' toes. So I'll let Jack take over the stuff that we said he can do for us.
Thank you, Leo. Jack?
I've heard a lot of talk lately about charter change and strong administrators and weak administrators. The key to having good government is having a good administrator. And what a good administrator does is he performs within the box that's carved out for him. I don't set policy. The commissioners set policy. So whether I agree with the commissioners or not, my job is to implement the policy that the commissioners approve by a majority vote, irregardless of what I think or feel or what I like or dislike. A good administrator's role is to keep the commissioners constantly informed as to what is going on the campus, what are the needs that he's hearing from the towns, and to express his opinions if something might be going amiss. With the assembly, the administrator's job is to make sure they're likewise informed of what's going on in the financial state, under the charter, the financial state of the commission at any point in time of the county government. It's the administrator's job to communicate with the public on a regular basis, to talk with the town managers, to meet with the boards of selectmen at a time convenient to them when they want us. Paul Nowicki and I went on a tour last winter where we visited almost every town in the county at the regular board meetings, and we both conversed and educated the selectmen as to what we were doing in their respective communities. It's also the county administrator's job to make sure that the public is informed. So we've upgraded our website this past year, and we're constantly working to make sure that the public has ready access to what goes on in this county on a regular basis. Perhaps the most important role of an administrator is to make sure his employees are performing. That means trying to keep morale high when times might not be so good. Keep the spirit up, make sure they're doing their job, make sure the policies are muting. There's a policy mutation that's consistent with what the towns want. Are we doing herring runs? Are we doing more herring runs? Should we be doing more herring runs? Should we be studying more with the estuaries? What's our wastewater management programs doing down county? How do we afford these things? These are the kind of things that we, as a staff, meet and talk about on a regular basis. And obviously, making sure that these assets that we have in regional government, remember the two principal points of having Barnstable County regional government are to expedite and efficiently bulk purchase with all the towns, which we do on a regular basis, and bringing a certain level of an expertise to the towns in terms of the science of running Cape Cod's regional government that the towns may not have, so that we work in partnership on a regular basis with the towns, whether it be by a joint intermunicipal agreement, or it just be a common service that we provide to the towns on a regular basis at the direction of the county commissioners. So that's what the administrator's role is here. Make sure the budget is balanced, that the public message is out there, that the employees are doing their job, and the elected officials are well informed.
Thank you. Before we have John, you mentioned Paul Nowicki.
No, Nizwicki.
Nizwicki, I am sorry. Some individuals may not know who he is. Could you tell us?
Yeah, Paul Nowicki was the executive director of the Cape Cod Commission, a tremendous asset to this county, a very good planner, a very powerful voice and change. And Paul's leaving us, unfortunately, next week to take a job in Weymouth to run the Southfield, the old Weymouth Air Base redevelopment plan. So that's what it was probably the first time. It was the first time. In fact, many of the top boards of selectmen told us they had never seen it before, where an administrator and the Cape Cod Commission CEO came out and spent time with them on a regular basis. And I'm hoping to do it again this year with the interim.
Thank you. John Oman.
Oh, thank you once again. The Assembly of Delegates is a true legislature, so we're there to counterbalance the actions of the executive branch, AKA the 3 county commissioners. So, and we're a true legislature. We are population-based, so we have 15 towns, as you know, from Bourne to Provincetown, and we vote according to the census previous to the last legislature. So the 2010 census dictates who we are. We vote from the smallest town of Truro to the largest town of Barnstable based on population. So to put it, succinctly, the person from Barnstable, Pat Princey right now, gets over 21% of the vote. And the woman from Truro gets 0.93% of the vote. But, and some people are upset with that, but I defend it. I may want to tweak it a little bit at some point. I would, if anybody wants to ask that question, I have some ideas. But so we are a legislative body, and we represent every citizen of Barnstable County that way. What do? We review the commissioner's budget annually. They are going to bring out their budget to us in February, and we have a set of meetings by subcommittee reviewing every portion of their budget to see if we like it, if we want to amend it, if we want to get rid of some things. But our intention is to perform a well-balanced, a balanced budget, well connected to every citizen that we can touch on Cape Cod. And we do that, like I say, through the subcommittee meeting, and we end up with a public hearing, which sometimes is very contentious if there's something that the public doesn't like. And you're all welcome to participate in even in the subcommittee meetings. So mostly everyone comes to the public hearing to make the determination of what they think the county budget can look like, and everyone's welcome to that on an annual basis. And then we vote the budget in early May, and if we change things significantly and the commissioners don't like what we've done, they can veto a budget, and that has happened. And then if we are confirmed that we think that we've set the right budget, we can overrule that with a 2/3 majority. So that's the legislative part of what we do as a counterbalance to the executive branch. Another thing we do is in the late 80s, 88 and 89, the legislature was going to create the Cape Cod Commission, which is a land planning agency with immense powers to regulate how Cape Cod will grow and how it will not grow. And it has evolved through the latest person, especially Paul Niedzwiecki, into a powerful organization. Well, we are there also to pass any of the regulations the Cape Cod Commission wants to enact. It's up to the Assembly of Delegates to pass it or not. DRI is probably the most important one, District of Regional Impact. So if the town of X, you plug in your town, wants to do something very big in their town, they'll have to go to the Cape Cod Commission and ask them to review, and the Cape Cod Commission will come up with a decision that will have to go through the Assembly of Delegates. DCPC, is anyone familiar with that? The District of Critical Planning Concern, there's been several of them Cape-wide, where they want to do a major environmental project on the Cape, and we can restrict that town from doing anything until it's reviewed fully by the Cape Cod Commission and they come to an agreement with the town of how it's going to be. So we do those sort of things. That's what the legislature did. They wanted the people of Barnstable County to have a widespread voice, a very powerful widespread voice from every town to say, if you're going to have a large planning agency, we want the people of Cape Cod to be able to direct how it's going to go forward. So that's a very important thing that I don't think many people really grasp easily, that what the Assembly does, and one of the most important functions that we were created to do. So we have subcommittees. We have economic development subcommittees that deal with those things on the Cape. We have a human services subcommittee that deals with things, public safety, IT, which is our newest one, but we're going through Open Cape now. I hope many of you know what Open Cape is. It's a wire, it's a high-definition wire system that ranges from Warren to Provincetown and into Woods Hole, which brings high fiber optics and communications to everyone. We still haven't figured out the last mile, but that's our goal, which will probably bring much more business and much more youth-oriented people that can export their knowledge, and that's what IT does for us. And finance is the main subcommittee that deals with the budget situation in conjunction with the commissioners. If the commissioners come up with any sort of an ordinance any sort of a way to spend money that is not in the budget, and they want to add to it or subtract from it or do anything out of the budgetary process that has already been established, they would come to us with an ordinance, and they would have to ask us to review it and pass it. And we do that through a public hearing process, to which everyone it's always advertised in at least 2 newspapers in at least 2 weeks in a row, and everyone has the opportunity to come and weigh in. And we enjoy and would enjoy even more participation from the citizenry of Cape Cod to do that. We all of us are in the 19th year of AmeriCorps. I don't know how we would be without the AmeriCorps kids. They're young college graduates that come here, and they have an environmental purpose to their jobs, and they go to each and every town, and they perform services that the town cannot afford to do on their own. And they're a wonderful cadre of young people, and I think there's been, over the course of those 19 years, 177 of them have chosen for at least some point in time to stay on Cape Cod after their service is done. Our county, right now, our county enjoys the Mike McGuire from the, what's it called?
Extension.
The Cape Cod Extension Service. He's a former young man who was volunteered for AmeriCorps, and now he's heading the entire department. And he's been a wonderful resource for us. And there's many others like that, too. We operate, the county commissioners and the executive branch have about 168 employees, somewhere in that range. Barnstable, our administration, we have 1 full-time executive secretary, and she doubles as the county clerk too. So we're the smaller of the 2 branches economically, but I think that we counterbalance the needs of the people to make sure that we are spending all of our dollars and our programs wisely.
Thank you. So I'm hearing about county commissioners and Cape Cod commissioners. So can we expand on the differences of those a little bit, Leo?
Well, John started explaining some other things that the county does when he mentioned AmeriCorps. AmeriCorps is a division or a part, a service, if you will, that is offered by the county government. Before I get into the Cape Cod Commission, we do put out this annual report every year. I'm very sorry I only brought the 1 copy with us. We're expecting the new FY17 ones to be out soon. But in here, there will be every single department of the county is listed in here. The health department, what we do in the health department, what we do in the dredge, and how we use the dredge to service the towns. John mentioned the AmeriCorps. And one other, and I'm going to say the word department, but legally it's an agency of the county, is the Cape Cod Commission. A number of years ago, I want to say probably 15 years ago, the state mandated that regions across the Commonwealth have regional planning authorities or regional planning agencies. And because the Cape is so defined as a region, just because of our geographical layout, it seemed really common sense to us to create the Cape Cod Commission. It was created by statute. There is a state statute. As I alluded earlier, we're governed by our charter, while the Cape Cod Commission is governed by their state statute. They have a taxing ability. When you go home, pull out your tax bills. You will see in there probably the line for the town, directly what the town is assessing you for your house, and whatever you pay per thousand on that for the town. You probably see a second line, which will be the CPC funds, which is the Community Preservation Act, or CPA funds. And then you'll see an environmental tax. Why it's called environmental tax, I'm not sure. It should be called the Cape Cod Commission tax. But that environmental tax that is on your tax bill is collected directly from you through the town when you make that payment, and it goes directly to the Cape Cod Commission. They operate using those funds that they collect from you. We have some intermunicipal agreements, if you will, that are contractual agreements that we have with the county's general fund and the Cape Cod Commission when we do things together. But for the most part, they operate using their own funds. The confusing, again, part, and I apologize for this, is they are called the Cape Cod Commission. They have a board some members refer to their board as commissioners. They are appointed by the towns. They are not a weighted vote. They are just an appointed committee. Each town has one representative. They have an executive director, which we talked about earlier. But I am not a Cape Cod commissioner. So when I first was elected to this seat, my phone was inundated by people either praising the Cape Cod Commission or mad about the Cape Cod Commission. And I cannot stress enough, the county commissioners have very little to do with the Cape Cod Commission. It's an agency, and it's really run by its own structure. We do a lot together, but the only authority that the county commissioners have is the hiring of the executive director, and that is clearly spelled out in the statute. So I hope that clears a little bit of the confusion up. But again, the Cape Cod Commission is our regional planning authority. And if I just may take one more thing and add to it, there are many people out there that want to do away with the Cape Cod Commission, and there has been a number of attempts over the years to withdraw from the Cape Cod Commission, which, by the way, a individual town can do if they want to. However, state law mandates that they assert themselves with another regional planning authority. So if the town of Howard, and I'm going to use Howard because that's my town, if they wanted to pull out from the Cape Cod Commission, they would lose a lot of state funding and a lot of state aid unless they affiliated themselves with another regional planning authority, and the next closest one would be Plymouth. So it seems kind of silly to leave the Cape Cod Commission and align yourself with a regional planning authority that's not even in your area. So we could spend a whole night on the Cape Cod Commission, though, and the structure. But I hope that covers the general question.
Thank you. Anyone want to add to that?
Yeah, just, Leo's 100% right. The enabling legislation of the Cape Cod Commission calls them an agency of county government. That's it. That's the only association. They do operate under our personnel procedures and our budgetary procedures. But aside from that, the CEO does the internal hiring, subject again to the legislation which mandates certain positions that they have to fill every year. They can't do away with them. And probably one of the more important things they do, and the Assembly does with them, is the regional policy plan. Every 5 years, they're supposed to develop and design a new regional policy plan or amend the existing one. That has to go to the Assembly and be approved by the Assembly, and then on goes to the county commissioners for approval. That regional policy plan sets the tone for what's going to happen to Cape Cod in terms of development, new growth, water protection, and water quality initiatives over the course of these next 5 years. And the regional policy plan, I believe, John, is up this summer for final approval. It's at the 5th year now. So it'll be your bookmark for what's going to go on in development on Cape Cod over the next 5 years.
John, perhaps you could explain the weighted vote of the assemblies. You mentioned that earlier.
I will do that, but I did want to there was one more thing about the Cape Cod Commission.
Sure.
Everyone out there and in the viewing audience should know. The Cape Cod Commission passed the 208 plan. We were under siege from the Conservation Law Foundation and the Buzzards Bay Coalition to get rid of the majority of the nitrogen loading that we have on the Cape. And they sued the EPA and said to the EPA, Cape Cod is not doing enough to get rid of their nitrogen loading. It's ruining the environment. So they they sued the EPA to...
In the towns.
Well, not the towns, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. They sued the individual homeowners of every town to saying, you're not doing enough with your septic 5 systems to get rid of nitrogen, because septic 5s do not get rid of nitrogen. And the Cape Cod Commission, through the brilliance of Paul Niedzwiecki and his staff, came up with a 208 plan, and that's a plan that deals with this issue by watershed. So going forward, you're going to see all of these towns. I know that Harwich, Dennis, and Yarmouth are getting together to comply with the total maximum daily loads that nitrogen that the 208 plan demands you shrink. So those are things going forward that those are the things going forward that you have to know about your town, your house, and your liability in your working years and your retirement years that could very dramatically affect you. The Cape Cod Commission has been dramatic on that and have been fantastic. Weighted vote. Okay. Thank you. Weighted vote. We have, as I said earlier, we have 15 towns. The smallest town would be Truro, 0.93%, and the highest weighted vote would be Barnstable, and I said 20. I said 21. It's 20.92. So you vote on that basis on almost every financial vote that you take, ordinance that you take, is always done by weighted vote. There are several occasions when you vote for the Speaker of the Assembly. That's one person, one vote. Should there be a vacancy of county commissioner, and that seat needs to be filled for a temporary period until the next election cycle, the Assembly would vote one person, one vote for that thing. If that happens again, it's happened only once in 2000 when Senator O'Leary, when Commissioner O'Leary became Senator O'Leary, we replaced him with that process. But the weighted vote has been a contentious thing because some people will say, geez, why does Truro get 0.93%? And actually, you could almost say, why does every town east of Dennis roughly be the same exact weighted vote as the town of Barnstable? And to some degrees, I agree with that. But it's based on population. It's a true legislature. Why does California get more votes in the House of Representatives than Massachusetts? Because they've got more people. The one thing I've promoted in the past that has fallen on deaf ears is I think it's not about the smallest towns. It's about the cumulative weight of one person getting 21%, and in Falmouth's case, one person getting 14.7%. I've always thought that we could put a codicil in the Home Rule Charter that would not allow any one person to have more than 1/8 of the vote, 12.5%, and you would get 2 voters from Barnstable, and you would get 2 voters from Falmouth. And that would solve all of those vitriolic proposals of why we have such one person with such power. And likely if Barnstable went north and south, or Falmouth went east and west, there would be 2 different people with 2 different ideas on what they think their town should do going forward.
Is it still up for discussion?
It is a moot point at the moment, but it could be brought into the discussion at any point in time, especially with any kind of public pressure.
What was that?
Any kind of public pressure. Yes. Jack, can you give an example of intermunicipal agreements?
Well, this is one we never really got quite comfortable with. There was an intermunicipal agreement for the Cape Light Compact, and between the county and the Cape Light Compact for some of the administrative roles, but we never really quite did it. But if 2 or 3 towns come together with the county and they want the county to assume an administrative program for these towns, we would do it by way of an intermunicipal agreement. So it would be a joint understanding with an MOU about what the role the county would play in terms of providing those particular services to that select group of towns that are interested in it. And in essence, we have intermunicipal agreements right now with a lot of the towns in the IT department, with Harwich and Truro, Wellfleet. We have a number of them where we provide certain internet services for those towns under an intermunicipal agreement.
Thank you. Can you explain the election cycles, the commissioners, and then perhaps the Assembly of Delegates?
Yeah, sure. The election for the county commissioners, presently there are 3, as I mentioned earlier. And to not have all 3 of them be up for election in the same year and have all new ones, they started it at a staggered pace. The thing about the county commissioners is that their elections are held on the biannual, every 2-year state election. So it's a 4-year term. The seat that I happen to occupy is up for election this November, and it'll take office in 2019 and run for 4 years. My fellow commissioners, both their seats are up for election 2 years from this November, at the biannual state election, and they serve 4 years. So there is an opportunity for two of the seats of the county commissioners to change during one election cycle, if you will, but not all three because of the staggered terms. The Assembly of Delegates is elected also in the biannual state election. However, the entire Assembly is up for election every 2 years. Now, I had already mentioned that the county commissioners are elected by the majority of the voters Cape-wide. That's not the case with the Assembly of Delegates. The Assembly of Delegates are individual representatives from each town. So there might be two people running in the town of Harwich for the Assembly of Delegates seat, and only one can win. And that person goes to the Assembly and becomes their representative. In Barnstable, there may be 4 people running for it, but only one can win. And it's the total votes from the town of Barnstable specifically for that seat that makes the winner. The other difference between the two is that the county commissioners is a partisan seat. So there are not only a primary that an individual has to run in, and the primary usually, and I think this year is going to be right after Labor Day, and it's the same primary that all the other state seats will be contested in. And then that person moves forward to the November election. The Assembly of Delegates is a non-partisan seat. So any individual from any town that you live in, you can just go down and draw out papers, and you do not have to run on a primary, and your name will automatically, once you fulfill the obligation of the signatures that's needed, you'll automatically be put on the ballot in November. So again, with that said, there could be 4 or 5 people on the ballot for the Assembly seat, only one being available, yet because of the partisan situation on the county commissioners end, there'll only be either a Republican and a Democrat or a independent. There could only be 3 running for the 1 seat. I hope that explained it.
I know there was a proposal to increase the number of commissioners to 5 to make it similar to other towns as a Board of Selectmen. Any discussion on that you want to bring up?
There was an ordinance that was brought forward actually just last week. It did not pass the Assembly of Delegates, but it was basically voted to be tabled, so it wasn't defeated either. I personally brought this forward when I was on the Assembly of Delegates. I brought it forward as a resolution, which meant it was basically the opinion of the Assembly of Delegates, and it passed. And I believe it also was brought forward as a resolution before, wasn't it, from the gentleman from Chatham? Did he bring it forward as a resolution earlier? I don't remember.
I believe he brought it after you, not before you.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it is passed as a resolution, which means it's a opinion. The problem that I saw personally, and I testified during the public hearing on this issue, is that the ordinance itself was not written concisely enough that would be able to go to the voters. This goes back to being a charter change. And remember, it's a big circle here when we do this for you. All goes back to the charter. In order to change the charter, you have to have an ordinance or a petition filed, and it has to pass the state legislature, and then it goes to the voters. So all the voters in the town, in the county of Barnstable, get to choose if they want to change the charter or not. So my argument was that if we're going to ask the voters to change the charter, that we should have a really well-written, accurate document. If you're talking about 5 commissioners, which I was in favor of at the time, fine. But where are the lines? Where are the regions? Are they partisan? Are they nonpartisan? How are you going to stagger their terms? And bigger than that, how are you going to deal with the transition? Anyone who's going to run in this coming November is running for a 4-year seat, representing all of Cape Cod. And it's really important that if at that same election we're going to have a charter change, that persons that are running for that seat have the knowledge of what's going to happen to them. Because if they're not running for a 4-year seat anymore, and they're not running to represent the entire Cape Cod, then what are they running for? None of that was worked out in detail, and that's why I believe, and I hope John can enlighten us on this, but I believe that's why the Assembly voted to table it. I don't think there were some people that were opposed, you can watch the meeting, but some were also open and a little confused like I was.
John?
Thank you. The genesis of this, I believe, is because just as the boards of selectmen have changed dramatically over the decades. There used to be 3 full-time board members, and it was fine. Now, with open meeting laws and the changes in government and the openness of it, 3 is a bad number. And I know Leo has often lamented, I can't even stand in the corridor and talk to one of my county commissioners about an issue without being in violation of open meeting law. So 3 has become a bad number, not for any other reasons except the architecture around them has changed as far as being able to discuss matters openly with your fellow commissioners. So 5 became a default number. I think at one point in time they wanted 7, right?
There was a number of
There was a
different,
county
there was a
on,
number of different
there was a
proposals
commission
out,
on county government that wanted 7 as well. But when the Cape Cod Commission got involved, they did a projection. You'd have to do it not by town. That's what the delegate from Chatham, Ron Bergstrom, had. He had just broken up by towns. Let's have Barnstable be one. Let's have Mashpee and Falmouth be one. Let's, nice and cute and neat. But you'd have to do it by precinct. And when the Cape Cod Commission came up with 5 county commissions by precinct to match exact populations within a tolerance, okay? My own town of Dennis had 3 county commissioners because we happened to be at the apex of it. So I was pretty much opposed to that at that regard. And then when it came back again, it reared its head again this year from Delegate Bergstrom of Chatham. He made it too simplistic for anyone to pass. And what Leo had said, and he testified, as a matter of fact, to that, saying it's not specific enough to pass muster, so let's not do it, or let's table it. And the discussion was tabled at that point in time. And there was one other thing. Oh, yeah, yes, that was the 2 things.
Continuing on about the charter changes, I know of towns that have spent a number of years on having a subcommittee work specifically on looking at every charter bylaw, for lack of a better word. Has there been any discussion, or does that happen periodically through your commission?
Okay.
Or through the assembly?
By
It's an
statute,
assembly function.
by statute, the assembly must have a charter review committee every 5 years or less. And our next year will be the 5-year term, and we're discussing exactly how to put that. And it's usually a wide swath of the public is invited as well. We don't make it an inside baseball kind of game with just the commissioners and the assembly talking about it. We go out to all parts of Lower Cape, Mid Cape, and Upper Cape and try to get involved citizens to come in and say, what do you want this charter to look like, and what do you have to do? Depending on the level of change, you can make it intergovernmental between the commissioners and the assembly, or if it is a bigger matter than you want, then it has to go back to the legislation. That's proven very difficult to do.
Could you clarify when you mention public, can they be part of the subcommittee or just?
Yeah, no, we invite the members of the public to be a significant, even a majority part of the subcommittee, of the committee, of the charter committee.
Thank you.
There's actually, by law, there will be public hearings, and we all are educated now and know what a public hearing is, right, opposed to a public meeting. So there is, by law, there will be public hearings on any charter change, and the public will have full participation at that time also.
What are the 3 top issues you are working on or will be working on in 2018?
All 3 of us probably have 3 different ones, so I'll go quick, and then maybe the 3 of us can get in, and I'll give you a total of 9. How's that?
That sounds good.
I'm working on county restructure. I personally believe that we need to do some more in restructuring, not the government side of it or the assembly county commissioners side of it that were talked about previously, but more the actual departments within the county itself. We're faced with some budgetary issues that really need to be addressed, and the only way they can really be addressed is a complete restructuring on how we do business so we can try to curtail some costs. I think the dredge is probably another #1 issue. We have a dredge operation. We have been operating with a dredge that's 20 years old. The dredge is operated in a revolving account, if you will. It's an enterprise fund.
Can
In
you
other words,
clarify? I know what dredge is, but there may be individuals
a
listening.
dredge is a very large piece of equipment. It floats like a floating platform,
Thank you.
and it has on it the ability to suck sand out. And basically, what we do is the pathways, if you will, that the boats take into your harbors. As the ocean brings in sand, over the years the sand builds up, and before you know it, there's only 3 feet of water. And if you have a boat that draws 4 feet, you can't even get into your harbor. So this dredge is a piece of equipment that actually takes that sand and sucks it out and makes a nice deep canal again. And we do a couple of different things with the sand. We can either place it on a public beach, a beach that is owned by the town, or we can have a intermunicipal agreement with another town and put it on their beach. And now we're even looking at renourishing some private beaches by charging the homeowners for the sand. But the dredge is a poster child, if you will, of county government. It's one of the best things that we do. And we have so much work, and there is so much work on our estuaries that we needed to buy a new one. So we have. We've taken delivery of it the other day. It's been a very, very long road. It's a $2 million piece of equipment. Again, it's going to take a new crew. It's going to take some planning. Dredging harbors is really based on a very short window of time because of environmental issues. So it's going to be really fun planning on where this one's working, where the next one's getting set up. The crew can move to that one, where the second one is going to skip over that one and go to the next place and get set up, so we can do as much as we can in that short window of time. The third one is, and we didn't talk about it too much, but when Jack came on board, and certainly I was 100% behind it, there was a lot of things going on in the county that needed to be cleaned up. We had a state audit done. The state audit, I'm very proud to say that by the time the state audit came out to us physically in a written form, we had already addressed most of the issues included in the state audit. But one of them was some lease language and some lease relationships that the county has with some properties that we own. And I've been working on that for about a year, and I'm very, very anxious and hopeful that in the next couple of months that's going to come to a good resolve. So those are my 3.
Thank you.
Okay, may I?
You may.
Mine are, as I mentioned before, wastewater management. It's the $5 billion problem that Cape Cod is faced right now, and it's by town. I think the town of Orleans is trying to pass a $92 million starter wastewater program in their town alone too. And as I said, we have a 3-town program from Harwich through Denison into Yarmouth that we're trying to do right now. So wastewater management, the 208 plan, is my number 1. Regionalization is my number 2. Regionalization, we talk about regionalization, and the dredge is the perfect regionalization plan. 14 of the 15 towns have a deep water port. So Brewster is out on the outs, but everyone else has a deep water port. And that dredge will dredge and redeposit the sand and other contents onto beaches or at least out of the waterways at 30 cents approximately on a dollar. I think that's still pretty accurate of what a private company would do. So we were able to really help the towns regionally save money so that they can have other services done to every member of their town. That's 2. And so third one is regionalization. And the core mission. I think that we are a wonderful county, and we do all kinds of things for all kinds of people. And I can't think of one thing that we do that I would like to cut out. But at some point in time, I think we have to go back and decide what we can afford to do and go back to our core mission. And I want to re-identify that and find out what the county needs to do to help the citizens of Barnstable County go forward into the 21st century. Those are my 3.
Thank you. Jack?
Yeah, I think you both set me up for this. Leo, in talking about restructuring, and John talking about let's look at what our priorities should be. When we talk about restructuring government, we don't talk about blowing it up. We talk about taking a good hard look at merging efficiencies and figure out how we can do it cheaper and without minimizing services to our towns. One of the things that I noticed at the end of my first year when things started to really sink in is there were a lot of silos in our county. People weren't working together. And we have this massive amount of talented, skilled scientists and leaders in the county that weren't talking to each other in the different departments. So we started working immediately to break down those barriers. We worked very hard with the Cape Cod Commission over the course of the last year to do just that. And therefore, we've come up with some policies. It goes back to what both Leo and John just said, signifying the significance of our dredge and making sure that we have a regional approach to using the dredge. So it isn't just town to town, but we look at things like the Wellfleet Harbor, Swan Pond, problems that need significant intervention. And we don't say the dredge is going to fix it. We say the Cape Cod Commission is going to come in and do a plan. The Cape Cod Commission is going to help us get the state permits to do this. We're going to use the Cape Cod Commission studies on sediment mapping, which are critically important to doing the beach control and beach maintenance projects that John was just talking about. Extension's going to go in there and work with the Cape Cod Commission through the county to monitor the herring runs and fish ladders. So once again, we get back to doing major wholesale projects like Wellfleet Harbor. And then finally, the health department's going to continue to do the water quality monitoring that's so significant to us all. These are the kind of things that we talk about in restructuring. And John's 100% right. Maybe there are programs that we've been doing for 100 years that just aren't relevant today, given the significance of the water quality problem that we have on the Cape. And maybe they have to go first, because there's only so much money. Remember, the county government, unlike your towns, is not appropriation-based. We're revenue-based. If the revenues don't come in, we have to cut. We have no other sources of money but for that tax and the excise tax that Leo referenced earlier. The Cape Cod Commission has a little more flexibility because they can take mitigation funds, they can charge fees for services, especially to private developers, and they can build up some reserves that way so when times get tough, they have money in the bank. We're a little bit different from that. And if we don't raise the revenues, if a recession hits and the excise tax drops dramatically, we have to cut. So to do that, we have to plan ahead. And to plan ahead means we have to be practical about how many people work for us. John mentioned 168. It's actually down to 152. And tomorrow we're going in to testify before the legislature on an early retirement incentive program that we've filed through the commissioners at the legislature to try to thin it out a little bit more. Not necessarily just to get rid of bodies, but to restructure how we do things and how we collaborate within the county. There are tons of policies I could talk about, but I won't bother tonight, under that restructuring program that will make more efficient, beneficial change to Cape Cod government.
Thank you. With regards to wastewater cleanup as an important issue facing us over the next 20 years, would you support Representative Peake and others' proposal to find a funding source and set up a wastewater trust fund, not under the Commissioner's or Assembly's control? I throw it out there.
Why would I support anything that's not under my control? I guess I'm kind of not really a tax and spend guy. So my gut reaction is going to be, I really need to know more what we're talking about and what you're talking about taxing and who will be in control of it. There's no way I would just blanketly approve that we just tax so we can spend more. No. I know there was some discussion about a room tax. I actually kind of believe that the room tax should be distributed more fairly than it is. A lot of people here have been saying that the room tax is a burden on the property owner. I don't particularly agree with that statement. The room tax is paid for by the person who's renting the room. And I align room tax with sales tax. And I've used this example in the past, and I'll use it again. I mean, I have a farm stand. I don't sell much stuff at my farm stand, but I can't figure out how to shut this telephone off. I sell books related to farming and Cape Cod and cranberries, and I have to collect the sales tax. So, I'm competing with Barnes & Nobles and other large stores. They all have to collect sales tax. That's fair. And to have a room tax and have a motel have to collect room tax, or an Airbnb have to collect room tax, but not let a small, I mean, again, let's say I wanted to rent a room for a week or by the week at my farm, I should be able to collect room tax. So I'm open to hearing plans, but I absolutely would not say that, yes, I support any new taxation just simply so we can tax and spend.
John.
That's a mentality that I stopped at the county when I got there, a spend, 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 until they had no savings left. And I'm very proud that today we're starting to build that savings back up again. And by the way, at the county, we, for the first time in 20 years, have a bond rating, and it is a AA bond rating. And I contribute that to not only the staff, Jack, but certainly I take a little bit of credit for myself too, because if you look at the history, the previous county commissioners never paid attention to it and did budgeting an entirely different way than I do it.
John?
Oh, thank you again. The tax that Representative Peake has promoted is actually two taxes, and it has to be thought of that way. She wants a rooms tax to basically, it's called an expanded rooms tax, to take private homes and condos and treat them like hotels and motels. I have my own litany of reasons I'm against that about this long, but I won't get into that. But that's a legitimate argument. What the other thing is that the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce and Sarah Peake want to do is they want to have a second tax to charge tourism, the tourist people, to fix our infrastructure for wastewater. And it's about a 2.75. It's going to kiss at 15% between the two. They're tying them together, but it's two very specific taxes that would attack the tourism industry and add almost 3% tax on top of the rooms tax, leaving it just under 15%, which would be the highest in the state by far. But and that is to fix wastewater. It's up to the tourists to fix our problems for us. I think that we need to grow a backbone, and if we're going to have to solve the wastewater problem, we have to solve it on our own tax structure and our own loan structure, and go back to the feds, go back to the state, and get revolving loans. And we have to fix our own problems here. You can't just burn. What we don't. I have another, again, part of that long. I have a dog in the race. The less tourism, the higher your taxes are going to be eventually, because there'll be nobody else to come here and pay for it. So I think that we're burdening the tourism industry enough, and that's not a. The second one especially is very easy for me to be against, because I think it should be a much wider spread population-based solution than an additional tourist tax.
Yeah, the chairman's 100% right. The devil's still in the details. There's no question the money could be used and put to an appropriate solution to a problem that we're going to inevitably have to deal with because of our geographic and geologic situation here on the Cape. And I'm always surprised. I guess one of the benefits of being a wash ashore is that you can come in and look at how Massachusetts taxes get distributed to certain communities. And quite frankly, you guys are getting jocked. Your lottery monies, your school money, you're just not getting your fair share from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And as Leo said, even the rooms tax.
Sales tax.
Remember, the Commonwealth grabs the first chunk of that rooms tax and takes it back to Boston. So can you change that? You got 7 very aggressive elected officials here that work pretty well as a team, but they're not going to do it unless they get the rest of the core group in Bristol County and Hampden County and some of the other counties to join in with them on that, to fix some of these formulas. So the devil's in the details. We certainly need it, and it would be very welcome if we could start the assault on that problem, but it's going to be a process.
Every one of our elected officials here on the Cape for the 30 years that I've been here, or 30-plus years that I've been here, campaigned on the fact that they were going to go to Boston and bring us back more of the tax dollars that we've been sending up there, and not one of them has done that to date. So I know that the task is tough because, again, there are 1 or 2 state senators in the group of 40, but it is a very poor distribution of funds when you consider. I mean, today I was at a luncheon with them, and I forget the actual millions of dollars that was stated that went up there from sales tax from small businesses, and the very small percentage of that we get back here. It's just really not fair. Believe it or not, the Cape is a huge wealth for the state when it comes to things like sales tax and room tax.
Yeah, I did one little comparison. I looked at the town of Canton. It has about the same population as the town of Dennis. Canton's up in Norfolk County. It's a very wealthy town. Dennis residents and tourists, obviously, buy more lottery tickets here than they sell in Canton, and Canton gets twice as much from the lottery as the town of Dennis. Something's wrong there. So,
Who can we call?
It's who you elect.
I think everyone should be calling the state representatives and the state senators and voice their opinion. I mean, I'm pretty sure this is, the Canton thing is stunning to me. It makes perfect sense, but I had never thought that way. If I think, is it Weston or Wellesley? One of the very wealthiest towns in Massachusetts does not allow the sales of lottery tickets, and they get a full share of the lottery money anyway. If we stop selling lottery tickets on Cape Cod, I think we'd get their attention very quickly.
Explain what, quote, ordinances, unquote, are that Assembly operates under.
John did a very good job of explaining the Assembly of Delegates. I like to even break it down simpler, though. The Assembly of Delegates basically is town meeting. And why I say that is because it makes you be able to understand how they operate. When you go to town meeting, you are the legislative body of your town, and you do approve the budget. Now, you may not sit there like John does, line item by line item, on the Assembly of Delegates and hold those other meetings, but it's still the obligation of the legislative body to approve the budget. And then when other things that you do at town meeting, like authorizing the expenditure of money, you do it usually through the term called an article. Most town meetings that I've been to anyhow, they use the term article. In our situation, we use the term ordinance, and we also use the term resolution. The difference, again, trying to just make it as simple as possible, and I know there's the devil's in the details, and you can read all this in the charter, because it is in the charter, and it's in our operating policies and procedures. But quite frankly, just very simply, the ordinance really is something used to do something major, transfer monies from one line item to another, amend the budget, purchase property, create a entity, whether that be like a new subcommittee. And resolutions basically are the opinions. And as I mentioned earlier, a perfect example would be you have a resolution saying we want to look at going from 3 to 5 commissioners. If that passes, that gives you kind of the idea it's time to write an ordinance. And you can be real specific because in order to do that action, you need an ordinance. So those are the two terms you will hear, though, resolution and ordinance.
So resolution would be non-binding?
It's, non-binding is a tough, I would not terminate it a non-binding. It's basically the opinion of, because you can actually do some actions through a resolution.
But the article,
But the ordinance would be
the
the actual
ordinance.
device that you would use for more binding and more substantive, if you would, actions.
thank you.
yeah, the budget, for instance, is an ordinance. So to change it, you have to do it by ordinance. And another form of ordinance would be a midterm transfer of money. That would have to be done by ordinance. A resolution is more of an opinion.
How can we encourage cable competition and better internet?
Another misnomer and another kind of thing out there is Open Cape that John mentioned. Open Cape is not a part of county government. Open Cape is a collaboration of federal and state funds that were applied for by a nonprofit to put in fiber optic cable down, again, not to get into the weeds, but just to make things simple, basically right down Route 6 from one part of the Cape to the other, and then connect up to a hub. I believe the hub is out in New Bedford, where then it connects into the World Wide Web from there. It is not a department of Barnstable County. It's not an agency of Barnstable County. The only connection that we have with them in any kind of an intermunicipal agreement is that they lease space from us. They are physically located at our compound. Now, to try to get them to, now that they've gotten this $36 million grant and put in this fiber optic main cable, the next thing is to get them to try to contract or go to, and I think John used this term, the last mile, which means goes from that trunk cable that is installed, by the way. It's there now and it's operating. But to go from that trunk cable to your homes is the next hurdle that they are looking at. And quite frankly, I'm not really sure if that's going to happen relatively soon. As someone who's really not, I don't consider myself internet savvy, but I do know that technology moves very, very quickly. And quite frankly, I think that we're probably going to be in the age of satellite contact before we get the last mile on Open Cape. There is some connections to some municipal buildings along that trunk line, which has helped schools and has helped some libraries and some town halls, police stations, yet they have not, in Woods Hole, but they have not yet, to my knowledge, brought it to people's homes. But that was the plan. So don't yell at me at that one. It's nothing to do with Barnstable County government, other than being a tenant. Best
Jack.
I can do is throw them out if you want me to.
Jack, you wanted to say
Yeah,
something?
I could just add that dark fiber would be obviously a huge asset for the Cape if it was properly deployed. It just hasn't yet been properly deployed because, as Leo said, there hasn't been the money to run it that last mile, which is extremely expensive. We're still looking at it. Randy Hunt has expressed interest in opening this up again for discussions, and we're working with Randy's office to see if there is a solution to it. It could transform the economic resurgence of Cape Cod if we get it out there, because it's 20 to 50 times faster than anything you'll get. Now, on the flip side of that, it doesn't solve the monopoly problem. Comcast has woken up to that, and I think sometime this year Comcast will be unveiling a much broader and faster service to the homes, but you're still dealing with the same issue that you mentioned, monopolies. If Open Cape doesn't get up, we've got one provider on Cape Cod, period.
Jack, do you set the budget and then present it to the commissioners and the assembly?
The budget really, it's not done in a vacuum. It's not done in any particular box. The chairman and I would start talking about the budget in September. And then over the course of the next several months, the chairman has meetings with some of the department heads. I have meetings with the department heads. And like I said, because we are a revenue-based economy, year to year, there's not a lot of changes in the budget, especially now when we're trying to constrict growth, not to find new projects. So that what we do is Wednesday, in fact, the chairman will be, and the Board of Commissioners will be doing what they call a budget workshop with all the department heads. They'll be going through the budget, maybe taking a vote on approving certain departments or all of the departments. And
He's shaking his
they'll
head
wrap it
no.
up. They'll wrap up the fiscal 19 budget process in the commissioner side a week from Wednesday. So, and then it will go over to the assembly on February 7th, and they'll start their process. But it's really something that just doesn't happen in a vacuum. I don't think there are many days since I've been here, since Leo's been chairman anyway, where I haven't talked to him. There aren't many days go by where we don't talk about some of these issues.
While we're here.
Yeah. The dog's barking. The dog's barking.
What are we talking annual budget-wise?
About 28.5 million is our working budget. We're still up over 29 right now, so we have some work to do in the next couple weeks.
Just for point of information to those who might want to attend meetings, can each of you mention when your meetings are and where they are? And we have a few more questions, but perhaps if they wanted to get in touch with you and you're willing to put out either your email or your phone number, this would be a good opportunity to do that. I'll start with John.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the Assembly meets the first and third Wednesdays of the month on a regular basis at 4 p.m. We frequently have subcommittee meetings and public hearings before that, but it's usually on the first and third Wednesdays of each and every month. And then in budget season, we expand that to most every Wednesday, and we have subcommittees that run through starting at as early as noon or 1 o'clock and go from there. The commissioners meet on a normal basis at 10 a.m. on Wednesday, every Wednesday. And you can find all of our emails and any access that you need to on the Barnstable County website. There's delineations for county commissioners, for the executive directors. There's the for every department and for the Assembly of Delegates and every one of your 15 memberships. And I would encourage you, I think, speaking for myself with the Assembly, I think the Assembly members are looking for more interactions with their citizens. They want to hear from you. And we're sort of a very a hidden organization. You know, we want to be more out there, but people don't seem to contact us unless there's the one exception to that, I think, was the Sheriff's ICE program. That drew 120 people out to the Assembly meeting that day. And that was quite dramatic. And we'd love to see that more often. We'd love to see much more civic engagement, where our emails and our phone numbers are out there and easily accessible on our Barnstable County website.
Yeah. And the commissioners meet every Wednesday. The time can vary depending on, remember, the commissioners are part-time, so their time can vary giving personal business decisions they have to make. But once again, it's on the website. It's always posted a minimum of 48 hours in advance as to the time. And I should point out that the commissioners the county commissioners don't just sit in the county commission charter's position. They serve on a number of boards and commissions. So they're extremely busy. They're out there all the time. But as John said, their address, my address, our phone numbers are all listed on the website.
Does anyone have the website offhand?
BarnstableCounty.org.
Yeah, but www.barnstablecounty.org. And I do want to point this out, too. It's been a bone of contention of mine for a long time. It's necessary with the structure of where we meet. The commissioners meet at Barnstable County Superior Courthouse in Barnstable Village. And on the other side, on the other side on the other side, at the moment, for the last 29 years, we've been meeting at the district courthouse. And I am understanding we're getting evicted. Huh?
Yes, you're getting evicted. You're moving tomorrow.
So,
And where will that be?
Well, for now, I hope they'll be up at the Harbor View Room, which the county owns, up at the old jail. But there is a massive construction project ongoing to convert the old east wing of the jail to a multi-purpose function area where the assembly will meet on a regular basis, and that will hold a minimum of 75 people. So it'll be bigger than the present location for the assembly.
Leo, you mentioned earlier, correct me if I'm wrong, about not subject to the open meeting laws, or that
No,
you
what I said
handled it
was the
differently?
charter does not have a description of the open meeting laws in it. So when the charter doesn't have something in it, the next thing you have to do is defer to state law.
Okay.
If the charter has something in it, it overrules state law. So but if it's not in the charter, then we have to follow state law. If it's not in state law, then you would follow federal law. But very rarely do we ever cross over into the federal law because we don't deal with things like that. Open meeting law is not written out in our charter, so we defer to the state open meeting law, and we follow their standards for the open meeting law, as do all boards and commissions in your towns throughout the Cape.
This may be a repeat because I'm not familiar with, I'll ask the question. Why can't the organization suggested by former Senator O'Leary and Rauschenbach in committee be reinvigorated?
It didn't pass muster with those who reviewed it and voted on it.
Could you
Quite
explain
frankly,
what it was?
I believe it was
briefly?
to do away with the Assembly of Delegates, to do away with the county commissioners, and to create a 7-member, I believe it had an option of a 7 or a 9-member board.
or 5.
And then also hire, and it wasn't clear. I go back to my original point. I don't like it when people bring things forward that aren't really clear. But they stressed on having a strong administrator. Now, the term strong administrator simply means that all the things that are delegated in our charter that the executive branch, the county commissioners are under obligation to perform, all of those duties would just go to a single individual. And that's where you will hear the term a strong administrator. But it wasn't clear if that strong administrator was an elected position or was an appointed position. And those are the questions that a lot of people wrestled with, because there was some out there that did not want to have a single person elected by the entire Cape Cod to have complete and unfeathered control of the county. in the event we elected the wrong person. Then there was a question about those 7 or 9. Where were they voted on? What were their districts? Who were they representing? What were their term limits? How long were they going to be there? Was there term limits? There was just too many unanswered questions. And quite frankly, and I've said this many times, the current structure of county government actually works well. It really does. I have sat in that room and listened and participated myself as a member of the Assembly of Delegates, and John can attest to this also. We have watched individuals who were representing a town with 0.97% of the vote through a discussion and open negotiations completely turn the vote of that room. And I've used this term many a times. It's not the seat, it's the person sitting in it. And currently, if we have good representation up there, the current way that this government is structured is fine. We unfortunately have not always had the best people sitting in some of those seats. That's all. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have an excellent county administrator right now. We have an excellent county government as far as I'm concerned. In the last 3 years, this county government has turned around immensely. And it's all because of some new leadership and a new direction. And we have an excellent Assembly of Delegates, people who are really up there, and it's great to listen to their debates. So I'm a big one for saying, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
John.
Get some
Yeah.
people to run.
Yeah, I was against specifically, I voted against it for a couple of good reasons. And it's basically almost exactly, Leo led me right into this, is that we want things to be town-based. I can't tell you, remember, 11 terms on the Assembly. I don't know what that really says about me, that I can't get out of my own way. But 11 terms, I've watched a lot of people come and go, and a lot of opinions and a lot of people. Your own late, great Mary Lou Pettit, she was my mentor in the Assembly when I joined the Assembly in 1997. And Mary Lou would know more about the issue than anyone else in the room, and she would let you know if you were just talking out of your hat. And she carried the day with 2.3% of the vote. I can't tell you how many times she got what she thought was the right thing for the people of Barnstable County with 2.3% of the vote on a consistent basis. And she was a little school mommy, if ever anybody knows Mary Lou. She'd say, if you were at that meeting as I was, this is what you would have heard. And she was a cogent, and I think Deborah McCutcheon from Truro right now, 0.93, she's a cogent argument. She's a lawyer. She makes a very good point, and she carries the arguments on many occasions. So I think that the town-based, and I hear from my town and towns that I deal with, I have a restaurant in Brewster, a restaurant in Orleans, so I talk to boards of selectmen pretty much Cape-wide. The boards of selectmen want a town-based representative. I don't think you would get that with the 7 commissions or 9 commissions. And if you saw how the Cape Cod Commission mapped out what they would look like, I think it would be more discouraging than encouraging to the people of Barnstable County.
I might add that Mary Lou was a long-standing member of the League of Women Voters. How can we encourage more people for committees in towns? And I know the League would back me up on that. It's always difficult to get people involved. Just your input on that.
You know, I say this a lot, and it's actually coming to a fruition now where I think it's going to make more sense. People need to realize it doesn't really make a tinker's darn who your President of the United States is. I'm really sorry it doesn't. It's not going to really affect your day-to-day life tomorrow. It is, however, going to affect your life tomorrow who your selectman is, because they're the ones that set your tax rate. They're the ones that spend your money that you're sending in your community. It matters who's on your planning board. They're the ones that design your neighborhood and bring in your neighbors, whether it's through development or non-development. They're the ones that encourage people to start businesses or not start businesses in your planning board. These are the things that are going to affect your life every single day when you get up. And you have an ability to change that and have an impact on it. Now, I'm not saying you have to go out and run to be a selectman, but you can certainly pick a committee in your town that interests you. Human services, help The elderly, there's all kinds of elderly services in every town, and there's boards and committees. The library commission, you can get on the library commission. The school committee. There's all kinds of volunteer positions. Start there. And if you don't want to yourself, or you don't have the time yourself, then get behind a candidate. To me, it's deplorable when we have in the town of Harwich an open selectman seat and there's one person running for it. No disrespect for the person that's running for it, but to have just one person running for it, it's not right. We need to have more involvement locally. It's a trickle-up effect. Start local, get involved local, and then you will find yourself through that connection expanding all the way up. And yes, they will hear you at the federal government level. I just came from a meeting today to come here. I'm, as Jack mentioned, we serve on a lot of different committees. I'm on the MPO committee, Metropolitan Planning Organization. All right, we could spend 3 hours on that one. What does that do? It spends $25 billion of your money here on Cape Cod over the next 20 years on infrastructure repair. Roads, bridges, the new signs going up on Route 6, those are all done through the Metropolitan Planning Organization right here. It meets every few months. So there are committees and there are ways, and believe me, once you get involved, you will have an effect all the way up to the presidency. But you've got to start out slow.
Jack?
Different generations. We came, our parents were World War II vets at a time where people joined things, whether it be the church, the VFW, Sons of Italy. People were members. People were used to participating in a community. It doesn't happen anymore. So I would say probably one of those things that every one of you that serves on boards could do is have a succession plan. Know your time's going to come and you're going to go, but make sure that you've got somebody a little bit younger with a good sense of community to take your place, because I don't know how else it's going to happen. The kids are more focused on their, like Leo, on his phones than
I'm just a kid to you,
yeah,
Jack.
it's just a kid on their phones than they are on what's going on around them. That's where they get their news, unfortunately.
John?
So
You
make sure you have a succession plan.
It's one of my biggest fears, whoever asked that question. We're losing our young people. People that were born and raised on Cape Cod, they don't have career possibilities here. They're leaving. And we're losing the young because there's no good jobs here. So this isn't an overnight solution, but we need good jobs here. I think Cape Cod Healthcare has done a great job of bringing young people in. We need more of those. People that are young, they're working 2 or 3 jobs. They're not coming home and saying, geez, I want to go to a 6 o'clock meeting, to see how the Harborways are doing. They just don't have that time. We need good jobs. We need this open Cape. I mean, I would advocate for open Cape because that will bring young people back in here that can have good jobs, export their knowledge, and have a life. We have the best lifestyle in Massachusetts, maybe in the United States of America, but there's no careers here. You can be a teacher, you can be a fireman, you can be a Cape Cod hospital worker, but what else is there? I mean, so we're losing those people. We've got to have affordable housing. We've got to have good jobs, and we've got to make that happen through our advocacy in our few remaining years as members of committees and members of town government. I'm also an advocate of getting rid of quotas for town meeting. I'm one of those people that say if you don't show up, someone else is going to decide how you're living. So because I noticed in my town they're worried about quotas. That our town moderator is begging people to stay after 8 o'clock at night. I mean, it's an endemic problem. It's not going away. It's increasing, and I think good jobs, careers, and affordable housing will bring young people back here because this is where they want to be. There's just no place for them to live here.
Well, I want to thank Jack Units, Leo Kukunis, John Oman. I, for one, have certainly learned a lot, and I hope you in the audience and you out there in the television audience have also learned a bit. This is pre-recorded. It will be broadcast at a later date or dates. So stick around, those of you in the live audience. I think if you have additional questions or comments, these gentlemen would be glad to take them from you and want to thank you again.
Thank you again for doing this.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.